to keep the government running, but he is also expected to declare a national emergency to build a border wall. Reaction is pouring in from Capitol Hill.
I'm going to support the national emergency declaration.
First of all, it's not an emergency. What's happening at the border? It's a humanitarian challenge to us.
Here's a case where the president, I think, has made the case to the national, to the country. We've got to secure the border, and it's a crisis. Here's one way he can help solve it.
It's hard to make a rational case for an emergency declaration. The border has never been as safe and secure as it is now.
Where to next? Ellison Barber, reaction from the Hill. Kevin Corke, reaction from the White House. And Kevin, let's begin there. 1 hour from now, what will we hear?
Well, expect the president to recognize that there's political risk from both ends of the political spectrum here today. But as he has shown previously, he is willing to accept that risk. And today he'll tell the American people why now is the time to act, to do something about the ongoing humanitarian and national security crisis along our southern border. Let me take you inside the numbers as the president tries to lay out not just a reason for doing this, but how he intends to secure our border. $8 billion is what he hopes to claim. This money is listed, by the way, in order from least likely to be contested in the courts to most likely. $601 million from the Treasury Department's Drug Forfeiture Fund, $2.5 billion from the DOD's Drug Interdiction Program, another $2.2 billion from the DOD's fiscal year 2019 appropriation. There's some flexibility there, about $4 billion. He is hoping to come up with $2.2 billion there, and another $3.5 billion from the DOD's military construction budget. Now, it is important, Bill, to note, this does not include any disaster relief money, nor does it include the $1.375 billion that's in the bill that you and I have talked about at length since yesterday on Capitol Hill, when lawmakers decided to come together and create an opportunity to fund the government. It's also important to point this out. White House officials tell us, Bill, they expect this to end up in the courts. But the idea is, if he's hoping to claim, say, $8 billion, maybe $4.5 billion doesn't get challenged. That would certainly give him a very good start to securing the border.
Okay, we're going to work through it together. Kevin, thank you for that. What's the Justice Department saying about possible litigation next?
Yeah, the DOJ has actually, Bill, warned the White House that they should expect this to end up in the courts. But to be sure, understand that the White House has been preparing for this to end up in the courts. I think you've heard a number of lawmakers suggest that this has to be fleshed out. But it's also important to point this out, Bill. Congress gave the president broad authority under his ability to declare a national emergency. And so that is the real fight that we expect to come down the line in court. But above all else, Bill, I think the key question is this: how many presidential executive orders have been overturned by the courts and then sustained by the Supreme Court? That's what the White House is banking on here. I don't think that's a big number. They're hoping it doesn't add one this time. 10 a.m. Rose Garden. We'll be here for you, but for now, back to you.
57 minutes and counting. Kevin, thank you for that. Sandra.
Important to note there are dozens of national emergencies currently in effect. Here are a few. President Carter blocked Iranian government property after 52 Americans were held hostage at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran in 1979. President Clinton prohibiting transactions with terrorists who threatened to disrupt the Middle East peace process back in 1995. President Bush blocking property and transactions with persons who commit, threaten, or support terrorism after the 9/11 terror attacks of 2001. President Obama blocking property of transnational criminal organizations in 2011. And last year, President Trump imposing certain sanctions in the event of foreign interference in a United States election. Now to Capitol Hill as lawmakers react to the spending bill and the president's decision to take executive action. Ellison Barber is live in Washington. A big morning, Ellison. Good morning.
Hey, Sandra. Yeah, that's right. You have two different things going on. You have the funding bill, and then you also have the all but certain emergency declaration. The latter of those two seem to be ruffling the most feathers on Capitol Hill this morning. Democratic attorney generals in states like California, they are already suggesting that they will take legal action here. And then specifically on Capitol Hill, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says that Democrats are currently exploring all of their options.
I may. That's an option, and we'll review our options. Here he said, let us respect what the committee will do, and then walks away from it. We will review our options. We'll be prepared to respond appropriately to it.
A lot of Republicans are siding with the president here. Some, however, say that they want to wait and see exactly how those funds would be transferred and where they're going to come from.
I've just had an opportunity to speak with President Trump, and he, I would say to all my colleagues, has indicated he's prepared to sign the bill. He will also be issuing a national emergency declaration at the same time.
I think, I've been very clear on my concerns about the president declaring this as an emergency in ways that haven't been done before, and that's still my view. But let's see exactly what he tries to do and how he tries to do it, and then we'll see where we go from there.
Other Republicans say they are concerned. Senator Marco Rubio said in a statement that today's national emergency is border security, but a future president may use this exact same tactic to impose the Green New Deal. He said that he would wait and see, but he's skeptical that this is going to be something he can support. As for Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, you heard some of that clip there where he then went on to say that he supports the president's decision to move ahead with this national emergency declaration. That's something that he was not saying just a couple weeks ago. Sandra, you'll remember he initially had advised the president and said publicly he didn't think this would be a good idea. Sandra?
Good info. Ellison Barber live in Washington for us this morning. Thank you.
Let's get some immediate reaction from a man who lives through this. Hector Garza is a Border Patrol agent, Vice President of the National Border Council, live in New York City with us. And, sir, good morning to you. Based on what we're hearing,
well,
do you approve?
We definitely support a border wall. It's something that's needed. Just in the Laredo sector area of operations, we have 170 miles of border and 0 border walls, and we get drugs and a lot of people coming across.
Okay, the decision, let's see how it goes after he makes it today, but we expect him to announce a national emergency and take more money from it. What are the pros as you weigh them right now against the cons to such a decision?
Well, if you think about it, in the Rio Grande Valley, in just one day, one section of the border, we apprehended 1,300 illegal aliens coming across. Our resources were full with those aliens, and guess what? The drugs are still pouring in. So the pros is that we're going to save American lives, and we're going to stop those drugs and stop those criminals from coming across.
Do you see a downside to this decision, then, Hector?
No downside. When it comes to safety of the American people, and even the safety of those children that are coming across, there's no downside.
All right, 2018 on screen now. The number of apprehensions at the border, you're up around 400,000, 396,000. Have to go back to 2016 to get a number that high. Why is that happening at that level?
Well, it's happening because we're encouraging illegal aliens to come into this country. We're encouraging unaccompanied alien children to make that trek into the border.
How?
Well, by allowing them to, for catch and release, allowing them to stay in this country, and by allowing them to continue to exploit the asylum loopholes in the law. If Congress does not change those laws, things are going to get just worse. If you look at this border bill, there's some language in there that continues to encourage children to be smuggled into this country, just like in 2014 under the Obama administration.
In this bill, you believe. What's the language specifically that you cite?
The language says that these people will be shielded, that their sponsors will not be subject to immigration enforcement. Anybody in the household of unaccompanied alien children will not be subject to immigration enforcement. What does that mean is that those co-sponsors, those family members will not be arrested, will not be entered into deportation proceedings. Not even records checks will be able to be run.
Why would Republicans agree to something like that in the bill if it leads to what you're describing, Hector?
We don't understand. We know that the conferees met for 3 weeks. Why they came up with this decision, we don't understand. They definitely did not listen to the border security experts on the wall or on immigration.
Okay, you just mentioned Laredo. That's your hometown. Is there a wall in Laredo today?
0 walls in Laredo.
All right, how's the level of crime?
So we see crime. So right across the border in Laredo, Texas, we have a very dangerous drug cartel that conducts all aspects of human and drug smuggling, to include human trafficking. And we definitely need a wall in Laredo. As a matter of fact, we only have 2 miles of river roads in that area out of the 170 miles of border that we have in Laredo only.
If you get what you're looking for, what would it take to accomplish the mission?
Well, it's going to take President Trump and President Trump's will to make sure that he declares an emergency declaration, to make sure that we built that wall, but that we also take care of other aspects of border security, to include employee retention. Right now, the Border Patrol agents, we're undermanned by 2,000 Border Patrol agents. That's another important aspect that these congressmen are not talking about.
Is that in the bill?
It's not in the bill.
So that's a half measure in your view?
Of course.
So if they go forward with this and they get the money, and in a perfect world for Laredo, based on your perspective, what needs to be done?
We definitely need to work on physical barriers, infrastructure, technology, and manpower. Employee retention is the biggest thing. Border Patrol cannot keep hold with its employees. They're leaving this agency for federal and state jobs elsewhere.
How come?
Well, because of pay parity. If you look at some of the other federal law enforcement agencies, they receive way more pay than what Border Patrol agents receive.
So they're out looking for better jobs and better money.
Under the Obama administration, our agents lost a lot of money due to overtime cuts and budget issues. And all we're asking is for pay parity with our sister agency, ICE.
Okay, Hector Garza, thank you, Laredo, Texas. We'll see what the president says about your issues today.
Thank you, Bill.
And the concerns you have. Thank you for being here. 10 minutes past. Sandra.
All right, well, we have a lot more reaction and analysis coming up as we await President Trump at the top of the hour. Congressman Mark Meadows supports the president's decision to declare a national emergency. Plus, former Assistant U.S. Attorney Andy McCarthy will be here to answer all of the legal questions behind this move. So we know two things. The president is expected to sign this massive spending bill, but he is also expected to declare a national emergency. And then, of course, the big question is, and Andy McCarthy will obviously be useful for this, what happens next, Bill?
A lot of reaction coming up here. It's going to be a big morning. 60 minutes from now, we'll get you to the Rose Garden there. 11 minutes past now. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez catching heat from her own party after applauding Amazon's about-face on plans to set up shop in New York City. We're going to dig into that. This is a big deal, not just in New York, but reverberations all across the country, politically, financially, and more. Sandra, coming up.
Plus reports that Joe Biden, the former VP, will be running in 2020. So what that means for an already crowded Democratic field, we will ask the DNC. They are our guest joining us.
In the meantime, you've got these top Republicans demanding answers from former acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe after this bombshell interview with 60 Minutes. Jason Chaffetz reacts to that live, coming up shortly.
It is clearly an attempted coup d'etat. Let's assume the President of the United States was in bed with the Russians, committed treason, committed obstruction of justice. The 25th Amendment simply is irrelevant.
I was doing a very deep dive in the Trump campaign and anything they may have done wrong. My Democratic friends don't seem very interested in the abuses that I've seen. Mr. Horwitz did a pretty good report, but nobody's looked at the FISA warrant abuse, and I certainly will be doing that.
This is very interesting. Senator Lindsey Graham wants the former acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe to testify before Congress. After telling 60 Minutes, there were discussions about removing President Trump from office under the 25th Amendment. Former Utah Congressman Jason Chaffetz used to run the Oversight Committee. He knows this very well and in depth. And welcome back, Congressman, to our program here. Let me just remind our viewers what the headlines are from the 60 Minutes interview. McCabe says they wanted to know if the president was an agent of Russia. He did say that there were discussions about the 25th Amendment that would involve Mike Pence, the vice president. He denies that, by the way, Pence ever getting any contact with that from Poland this week. And he thinks that Rod Rosenstein was serious about wearing a wire to see if they could trap the president. Now, take from that interview and tell us what you believe is significant that we need to focus on now.
Well, Mr. McCabe has been very discredited. He did something that most other federal employees are never able to achieve, and that he was fired by his colleagues for essentially lying to Congress and lying to his colleagues. And he was dismissed. This is the acting director of the FBI fired. So his credibility is near zero. But he happens to be the second person to publicly back up and corroborate what we had heard. Evidently, the general counsel, who was also in that meeting, general counsel for the Federal Bureau of Investigations there at the Department of Justice, is telling lawmakers behind closed doors that this person, that Rod Rosenstein, was seriously considering wearing a wire on the President of the United States. And so now you have a second person, even though he has zero credibility, backing up that claim that it was serious. It wasn't just a joke.
Couple things here. This is the McCabe piece. We played a little bit of this yesterday. Here's more of that now from CBS.
I was speaking to the man who had just run for the presidency and won the election for the presidency, and who might have done so with the aid of the government of Russia, our most formidable adversary on the world stage. And that was something that troubled me greatly.
This really got our ears up yesterday. Some are suggesting that this is old news, and it's only out now because he's got a book out. Be that what it may, here is Alan Dershowitz with Tucker last night talking about a coup. That's how he describes this push for the 25th.
If that's true, it is clearly an attempted coup d'etat. The 25th Amendment simply is irrelevant. It's not about the most fundamental disagreements. It's not about impeachable offenses. And any Justice Department official who even mentioned the 25th Amendment in the context of President Trump has committed a grievous offense against the Constitution.
That may be. I don't know where it goes next. Perhaps you can characterize that. I would imagine because Republicans run the Senate, they could get McCabe to testify. But I don't believe that'll happen in the House because Democrats run the House there. Go ahead, Jason. Tell us what's next.
That's true, because the Congress is terribly tardy in dealing with this. This came up months ago, and they essentially did nothing. Remember, Rod Rosenstein, he writes a memo. First of all, Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, is totally absent and incompetent and was nowhere to be seen. Rod Rosenstein writes a recommendation to the President. The President accepts that recommendation. The most bipartisan thing happening in Washington, D.C. at the time was the idea that James Comey had to go. But this 9-day period, that's where these shenanigans were happening, between the firing of Mr. Comey and the appointment of this special prosecutor and Mr. Mueller. That's the focus, and Congress should look at that. The most important players, Bill, at this point, Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General, has been looking at this for more than a year. I know he did an initial report, but he's been looking specifically at FISA abuse and what was going on behind the scenes. Yeah, he probably has more information than anybody in town.
So when do we hear from Horowitz? I do not know that answer in 30 seconds or less here. Lindsey Graham mentioned the FISA abuse there. I don't know when we get answers on this, but something was amiss deep in the FBI. What is your hunch? Who's telling the truth and who's lying about it?
Clearly, Mr. McCabe is not telling the truth. There is no way to believe he has zero credibility. Horowitz probably has the best credibility, but it's probably not till May or June that we hear back from him. Congress can do what it wants, but it's going to be the Inspector General more than anybody else. And the new Attorney General, also in place, who's got his hands full. He needs to dive into it right now.
Okay, William Barr confirmed yesterday, 3 or 4 months from now. We'll see if that's the case from Horowitz. Thank you, sir. Jason Chaffetz back with us today. Thanks. Here's Sam.
Thanks, Bill.
Well, they are almost a daily annoyance. Robocalls. Are they bombarding your cell phone, leaving voicemails in foreign languages? How the FCC plans to crack down. The chairman of that agency, Ajit Pai, will join us next on the battle to end those unwanted calls. Plus, liberal Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez applauding Amazon's decision to cancel plans to build a new headquarters that would have provided potentially thousands of jobs. Now members of her own party are firing back.
Look, New York City gave Amazon a real opportunity here. And all we asked was that they be a good neighbor and be part of the community. And clearly, they weren't ready to do that.
But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez among the liberals who have now cheered this decision of yesterday. Check this out.
It shows that everyday Americans still have the power to organize and fight for their communities, and they can have more say in this country than the richest man in the world.
Well, Governor Andrew Cuomo firing back, also a Democrat. A small group of politicians putting their own narrow political interests above their community. They should be held accountable for this lost economic opportunity. It's a really interesting story. The news broke with us yesterday.
It is.
You can understand on one side if you're given $3 billion in tax breaks to a company as big as Amazon. Problem is when they turn tail and leave and you're like, well, where did all the jobs go?
Yeah. So there's a lot of other cities in this country that would surely welcome Amazon.
Give them the tax breaks.
We had the Chicago Tribune editorial piece. Chicago's still here. They would love to have this. So where will they go?
My position is that if you listen to the Democratic Mayor Bill de Blasio, he was at Harvard last night. I think both sides are still negotiating. I don't think it's a done deal just yet. I think we have not heard the last of Amazon. We are sitting on this story. Prediction for you, Smitty.
Now to this. The FCC is warning phone companies to get serious about those robocalls, threatening to step in if major wireless carriers do not start using a caller ID system by the end of the year. After a study found nearly half of the phone calls that you will get this year will be spam. Let's bring in FCC Chairman Ajit Pai. Mr. Chairman, I think we've got everybody's attention. I mean, I took an informal poll walking down the hallways here at Fox News this morning, and this drives everyone nuts, these phone calls. What are you doing to crack down on it?
I'm one of them. I get those calls myself, and it's come to the point where I don't answer the phone if I don't have the number programmed into my phone. So we're cracking down in a number of ways. We are going after some of the scammers. The biggest fines in the FCC's history have been imposed on robocallers, and we've demanded that the phone industry step up and adopt call authentication, essentially a digital fingerprint for every single phone call this year, to make sure that a call is not going to be placed on your phone unless it's coming from a person who legitimately has a reason to call you.
Is that realistic? Could you realistically crack down on this? How are they getting our phone numbers in the first place, Mr. Chairman?
Part of the problem is that the technology has developed to the point that it's very easy to spoof a phone number. Even if you're calling from abroad, you can make it look like you have the same area code and the same first three numbers as somebody who's living in a small town in Iowa. And that's the reason why we are empowering phone companies to crack down on spoofed calls and demanding that they adopt call authentication.
But that's interesting, because you're actually warning of corporate regulation if you don't see change on this. And that's really interesting, under a Republican administration talking about regulating companies on something like this. Is that something you're willing to do?
Well, this is our top consumer protection priority. This is something I hear about all the time, including from members of my own family. And the law is pretty clear here. The FCC does have the authority to take action to protect consumers, to make sure that these robocalls aren't bombarding American consumers. It's generating a lot of fraud and waste and abuse. And additionally, it's just a hassle for millions of other Americans.
How do the phone service companies respond to that? How do they feel about that?
I've posted the responses of 14 of the major phone companies on our website. Folks can see it for themselves. Many phone companies are stepping up to the technological challenge and are making plans to meet my deadline of 2019. And we hope that the others will catch up, because time is not on the side of the American consumer, who is sick and tired of getting calls all throughout the day.
A third party who tracks these phone calls estimates that it was almost 50 billion robo phone calls that were made in 2018, and that was up 60% year over year. This is a real problem. I know that you and your agency are trying to tackle it. Something else I know that is on your radar, and that is America's fight against Huawei. Finally, I just want to ask you for an update there. I know this is something the administration has been very firm on. How are we doing on that? This is the Chinese telecom giant, by the way, where you are pushing for their technology not to be used here and abroad.
As you point out, this administration rightly has made it a priority to secure our communications networks. The FCC shares that priority. That's why domestically we have proposed to ban the use of federal funds to build broadband networks in this country using gear from countries or entities that are determined to be a national security threat to the United States. And that's why internationally I fully support Secretary Pompeo's call for our allies and many other nations around the world to take great care about the equipment that goes into their networks. It might harm their own security. It might limit America's ability to cooperate with them on certain security and communications issues.
Very interesting stuff. Chairman of the FCC, Ajit Pai, thank you for coming on. First time in America's Newsroom. Good to have you here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We can all relate, can't we?
Yeah. Stop those calls.
You're exactly right. Another day, another candidate. Word is the field is getting bigger. Reports suggest Joe Biden might be next. The DNC reacts to that. Sandra, coming up in a moment.
Plus, we are now 30 minutes away from a major announcement from the Rose Garden. President Trump set to deliver on his border wall promise. We are going to take you there live when he begins. Top of the hour.
I don't join with my colleagues in believing that if the president does this, when he does it, he's declared he's going to do it, that it will be the end of Western order. I don't believe that. The president is going to be acting with powers given to him by Congress.
Democratic presidential hopefuls are slamming the president's decision. California Senator Kamala Harris saying it is, quote, ridiculous. Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard says the move would get us closer to a dictatorship. New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand calls it an abuse of power. And Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren says this is a, quote, temper tantrum from President Trump. Let's bring in Sochi Hinojosa. She joins us now. Sochi, good morning to you, and thank you for coming on the program.
Of course. Good morning to you.
So we're not lacking reaction to the president's expected decision to announce a national emergency this morning, expected at the top of the hour. Is your party united in that response?
Well, I think our party is united in the response in terms of how a border wall isn't necessarily going to protect our border. I think that what you're hearing right now for Democrats is valid. You have a president who is going to declare a national emergency and then go straight to the golf course. If this were actually a national emergency, he would have done this his first day in office. But instead, this is a vanity project, and this is what we've seen from the president. It's a campaign promise, and he knows that he needs to deliver.
About it the way your party, and I believe both sides of the aisle, asked him to go about it, and he didn't get the amount of money that he was initially seeking. It was far less. So he's decided to go this route. There are a lot of suggestions out there that this means that your party, if in control of the next presidency, would do the same on gun control, for example. Nancy Pelosi made that suggestion. Is that where we are this morning?
Well, our party doesn't throw temper tantrums. That's not what we do. I think this is what the president is doing. He is throwing a temper tantrum. Democrats aren't always going to get what they want. And you just saw this in the last funding bill. I think that what happened in December was that Democrats came to the table. They wanted to work on a border security bill. And the president shut down the government and threw a temper tantrum. And so right now, the Congress is passing a bill that they could have passed back in December, but didn't because the president threw a fit over the border wall.
It didn't have any funding for the border wall in it. This one does.
Well, this one does have funding, but again, we were coming to the table and the president threw his hands up because it didn't have full funding for his wall. And whenever you don't get what you want, you don't just declare a national emergency and run off to the golf course. That is not what a president should do.
He would say he tried to compromise from Democrats, and Democrats just did not work with him. Final thoughts on that before I move on to the next subject?
Absolutely not. That's ridiculous.
All right. So Joe Biden, is he going to run?
Who knows? You know, this is a very personal decision for people. I think that you have seen Democrats jump in and the enthusiasm for Democrats right now. But running for president is one that takes a toll on you and your family. And so I think this is a very personal decision for Joe Biden. And if he gets into the race, we welcome him to the race because we understand that having a large group of candidates in the field only helps Democrats.
Who's your best chance at beating Donald Trump?
I think we have a great chance with all of these folks. I think you're going to have a robust debate starting in June with 12 debates that the DNC will be holding. And Democrats have a large field, but that's fantastic for us because that means more people talking about Democratic issues. Who knows what will happen? It is too early to tell. I don't think any of us thought that Donald Trump would be president in 2015. And so I think that the American people will need to decide, and we're really excited to showcase these candidates.
Let me ask you about the debates. As you just mentioned them, the DNC has announced at least this much, that it'll limit its first presidential debates this year to 20 candidates. That's a lot. Dividing the field over 2 nights, if necessary, and requiring candidates to meet either a fundraising or a polling threshold to participate. Anything else you want to add to that as the field here on your party side continues to grow?
That's right. I think that what is happening right now is we could have up to 20 candidates in the race. But what we want to make sure that we're doing is providing a level playing field so that every candidate and their supporters feel like they got a fair shot. And, you know, we believe that starting a process in June, having 12 debates, 6 in 2019 and 6 in 2020, will be ample time and ample discussion to talk about the issues. We want these debates to focus on policy issues. We don't want them to focus on hand size like the Republican debates did last time around. And I think that what's very interesting about our announcement is that we're not just focusing on polling for the first 2. We're focusing on grassroots fundraising, which hasn't been seen before. And that's where our party's going. And so we're really excited about this. And we believe that this will cause a robust discussion in our party.
All right, final thoughts on this poll. We'll at least for now, look at this poll. It's an FNC poll about Dem chances in 2020. Democrats' chances of beating Donald Trump in 2020. 19% say excellent. 36% good. Not much. 26%. None. 13%. As we look at that field growing, your final thoughts?
Well, a good indicator on whether or not a president can get reelected is his job approval numbers, and those at our all-time low for Donald Trump. And I don't think that he can get beyond the finish line with his current approval rating. And you saw in November that Democrats were elected in midterm elections by an overwhelming amount. There was a mandate there. And so I think that that is very telling that Donald Trump is in trouble. And right now, the news just broke that now he has a challenger, former governor of Massachusetts. If I were him, I would be a little worried about this. And so we're really excited to share our ideas for the American people. And we believe that whoever our nominee is will beat Donald Trump.
All right. We appreciate your time this morning. We will be watching it all. Seems like we're already there. Thank you. Come back.
Thank you so much.
Feels right? A little bit, huh? From Chicago now, a bit of a confounding story. Police identifying two brothers from Nigeria as persons of interest in connection with last month's alleged attack on the Empire actor Jussie Smollett. Mike Tobin is tracking that story live from Chicago. Mike, where are we on this now? Good morning to you.
Good morning, Bill. Police are now not confirming this flood of information that came out yesterday, dramatically stating that the attack on actor Jussie Smollett was staged and staged with his cooperation. On the same day that Smollett went on ABC's Good Morning America to say he was very upset with people who weren't believing their story or weren't believing his story, Chicago police picked up the two men who appeared in that grainy security video. Police said they were only persons of interest, no charges, at least not yet. Multiple outlets citing anonymous sources reporting that at least one of them was an extra from the show Empire, and these men staged the attack in cooperation with Smollett. Also reporting that the persons of interest were picked up at O'Hare Airport attempting to travel to Nigeria. Chicago police threw cold water on all of that, saying the anonymous sources are uninformed and inaccurate. Today, a statement came from Chicago PD saying that while we haven't found any video documenting the alleged attacks, singular, there's also no evidence to say this is a hoax. The alleged victim is being cooperative at this time and continues to be treated as a victim, not a suspect. Now, the persons of interest are lawyered up. Interviews will continue with the persons of interest and their lawyer today. Meantime, 20th Century Fox is denying the angle that the hoax was staged because Smollett was being written out of the show Empire. The statement reads as follows. The idea that Jussie Smollett has been or would be written off Empire is patently ridiculous. He remains a core player on this very successful series, and we continue to stand behind him. So a lot of excited reporting yesterday, citing anonymous sources, and today you have 20th Century Fox and Chicago PD putting a light tap on the brakes.
Wow.
Bill?
Mike Tobin, thank you. The latest there from Chicago. Thank you, Mike.
You got it.
All right, well, the number of households receiving food stamps is dropping dramatically under President Trump. So why is this happening? Charles Payne has some answers. He'll be here to break that down.
Also, Rose Garden in 19 minutes. Meanwhile, the new fallout from the former acting FBI director's interview on 60 Minutes. What leading Republicans want to know now. Republican Mark Meadows will talk about that coming up next live.
This interview, the excerpts I've seen really suggest that Mr. McCabe was hell-bent on stopping Donald Trump, not only from becoming president, but trying to make sure he did not stay president.
The Department of Justice using the full force of its power to actually contemplate what could be nothing less than a coup.
Top Republicans want answers, calling for the former acting FBI director Andrew McCabe to testify. He's telling 60 Minutes there were discussions about removing President Trump from office by invoking the 25th Amendment. That has been contested by Rod Rosenstein. Nonetheless, it's a talker. Republican Mark Meadows, chairman of the Freedom Caucus, with me now. Sir, how you doing? And good morning to you.
Good morning, Bill. It's great to be with you. Thanks.
What do you want to know about this now?
Well, I mean, we know an awful lot about Mr. McCabe. I can tell you not only was he fired for lying, but he was part of a process, a covert process within the FBI to continue an investigation on Donald Trump, even before and after the election. So he's not a credible witness, but we do need to hear from him again, I might add. But this all comes down to one thing, Bill. It comes down to 8 days in May. 8 days in May where Andy McCabe and others at DOJ and FBI wanted to get rid of this president and plotted to do just that. And, you have the chairman of Judiciary on there talking about a coup. Well, normally a coup has to be military in its format, but this would be certainly an administrative coup, and we know far too much.
So, Rod Rosenstein says it's all untrue. He dismissed all of it yesterday. Who do the American people believe?
Well, I think you can believe neither one.